Morning, everyone. It's Chef P. I just wanted to take you guys out for a little tour out in the backyard here. We talked about part of our hospitality and tourism curriculum is to talk about our impact on the environment, and we did that before we left on March 13th. But this industry obviously uses up a lot of resources and provides a lot of CO2 into the system, just in a lot of the wasting and all of keeping those hotels cold and keeping places warm and pools warm in the wintertime and things like that. So our whole industry has to take a look at changing the way that we do things, and composting is one of those things. With the waste that comes out of our industry, composting oftentimes just gets thrown away, or garbage just gets thrown away and all mixed in together. And by composting, we can sort of break down that organic material and then use it to do our gardens. Now, I've been doing this for years, and it does a couple of things. One, there's less garbage when I put out my garbage out on garbage day, and I've been doing that for years. The city that I moved from before I came to Sarnia, we were allowed one garbage bag every second week, recycling every week. But we also had composting being picked up at the street. I always kept my compost because I garden, and I like to use that composting. It just provides a lot of nutrition for the soil. So you may have noticed that we have a compost bin in the school, in the kitchen when we were cooking and stuff, and every Friday I would take that home and put it into my composter, and I've been doing that for a long time. And you can imagine that the amount that I would get there really almost seemed overwhelming. But what I do want to show you is that all that compost material has just sort of almost disappeared. It just sort of breaks down into soil, into really rich soil. So I'm going to take you over there, and let's take a look. Okay, so there's so many different ways to do composting. Traditionally, you would just have a compost heap where you would just throw all this stuff there, and you try to blend it up with grass clippings and things like that, and then you keep mixing it. You give it air all the time, and it helps break that down. Okay, so in my kitchen, I keep a bin like this. And so what I've got in there is there's banana peels, there's coffee grounds, a lot of coffee grounds, eggshells, there's pepper bits and things like that, onion peels, and all that stuff is all in there. And what I've got going on here, so this isn't completely finished, but it's breaking down, and you can see there's bugs and worms in there just doing their thing. And I know for many it seems absolutely gross, but if our industry did more composting, we would we could do a lot, because farmers can use that compost and put it into their gardens, which would mean that we'd have less chemical compounds in there, which would be a lot better for all of us. So back to the bin. So I don't know if you can see the size of this bin, but it's that size. And typically when I would bring those bags back from school, they would be, I'd fill the whole thing up and get all worried, like, oh my God, what am I going to do? But it all just comes down. And then there's this trap door in the front, so that when it's all done, you can just sort of scoop it from the bottom and put it into your garden. Okay, so I'm just going to throw this in there. That's it. All right, and maybe I'll just tuck you over here. There we go. And then I just use one of these and just mix it around. Now, if you're composting properly, the smell factor should be very, very low, and you don't want to put things like meats and fats and things like that. This should all be just organic material. And I just mix that up, and I try to do that almost on a daily basis if I can. All right, and in my case, just when I when I think about it. I'm going to put this lid on it. It has this little locking lid. And I'm just going to let it do its thing. Okay, so let's move over to the garden and take a look at that. Okay, so in this garden, what I do is I get lazy in the winter time and I take all my compost and I throw it into my garden. Okay, so when I'm not growing anything anymore, I just throw everything in there, including my Halloween pumpkin. And what I do is I turn over that dirt, I add compost to it, and I just keep turning it over. So this was turned over probably twice, but I've started to plant. So what happens with that is, of course, I do get a lot of weeds, which I have to take care of, but any of the seeds that were stuck in there from last year or that I threw in through my compost come up. And not that this is the absolute best method, but I like it. So what we've got going on here, these are obviously dill seeds that came up from last year. So I'll move this once I get moving. Also, I planted, I don't know if you can see this guy, that's beets. Okay, so I put a line of beets in here too. But what has happened in my soil is that here, you can see these are tomatoes. And what's kind of cool about every year that I do this, because of all the different types of tomatoes that I use, I get all kinds of different varieties that grow here. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take these guys out. I'm actually going to move them into these here, and I'm going to care for them a little bit, get them stronger, and then I'm going to replant them and also bring some to my mother's because I have a ton of them. So back to that Halloween pumpkin. Well, that Halloween pumpkin, all these seeds started growing. Obviously, I'm not going to keep these here. I'm going to take them out and move them probably once again to my mother's because she has a lot more space for this stuff. So let's come over here. Now, we have a great, I was hoping to find them here. We got some bees. Yeah, we got some bees. Perfect. So, see the bees? Beautiful. Okay. So these guys right now, chives are sort of blooming, and there's a lot of sugar in these chive flowers, so they're sort of trying to get that. Down here, I've actually planted a bunch of different squash. I like to move them to the side so that when they actually come off, they'll just sort of go around the sides, and I move them to the side here. So we'll do that. I've also got eggplant, celery. And this celery here, I started in the house with the bottoms of the celery that I actually buy, right? So those are coming up nice. This is romaine lettuce, and I did the exact same thing. So romaine that I bought, I just sort of rooted it in water and then planted it. Over here, this is mint, and this comes up every year. So this I don't have to do anything to. It just comes back every year. This is garlic that I did last year, and I try to keep a nice cycle of green onions here. So these green onions here are about 2 years old, like little spring onions. So they come up to seed, and then when they do that, to flower first, then they're going to go to seed, and then those seeds go down, and then we can actually plant those spring onions. So that's pretty good. Different squash here too. So I've got acorn squash, I've got butternut squash, and I've also got spaghetti squash in there too. Over here, Brussels sprouts. Okay, so these are Brussels sprouts. My son started those in his home and then brought them to me. And we've got some hot peppers here, okay, which my son also started at home. I'm starting my own in the ground. They're taking a little bit longer than his did, but we're doing that. Then over to the herbs. This is flat leaf parsley. Okay, this comes up every year, so I don't have to plant it. I don't have to bring it inside in the winter time. That just sort of handles itself. Here we have a little bit more dill. Can you see that? Yeah, that's dill. Okay, and that was seeds that came up from last year, which is great, and then I moved them over here. We have oregano in here. That will come up every year as well. Okay, so these perennial plants are great because you don't have to do anything in the winter time. They seem to die off and then they come back up. Funny little thing. I don't know if you know this, but flat leaf parsley is actually in the celery family. Over here, sage. Sage is absolutely wonderful. I like using, oh my god, I just like smelling. They smell so good. Sage comes up on its own as well. Okay, so that just comes up on its own. I like to cut this down, and sometimes I dry little bundles so I can smudge my home and that sort of thing. And over here, there's a little bit more garlic. Remember I told you about those little spring onions, how they come up? That's how they come up. And spring onions are kind of cool because they just they come up by themselves. So even it looks like they get frozen and die in the wintertime, they're the first things to come up, and they're quite strong and really delicious. Here we have tarragon. Okay, so tarragon's another sort of licoricey sort of smelling herb. It's really, really good. Works well in vinaigrettes and that sort of thing. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to take these tomatoes out. I'm going to put those in those containers and start clearing the way to move them back up into this area. Okay, so over here, I also wanted to show you this. So this here is an apple tree, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4 apple trees. 3 of these apple trees were started in the classroom the first year that I started there. So the first year we were at St. Pat's, I had plants in the class, and one of the students actually put seeds in my plants, and they came up. And when I saw them come up, I thought, oh, how cool. So I actually brought them to my house and planted them here. I'd like to put some at the school too. I'll have to get some permission there to do that. But these are pretty cool, and I've already taken these down. So they were actually quite high. So they're about 5 years old. But we're going to continue to keep these alive and see what we can do. Now, what's super cool is this latest apple tree. This one here is from the Great Big Crunch from last year. So if you remember the Great Big Crunch, I took all those apple cores and I put them in my compost. And oddly enough, one of those seeds actually germinated in my garden. So I took them out and we put them over here. So this guy here is only a year old, but that's pretty cool. Anyways, I think that's about it. I just want to encourage you to compost. So that means any organic materials that you use in your kitchen, instead of them going into the garbage, then you should compost those. And then when you compost those, you can put them in your garden, and that helps to promote worms, which are really, really good. So worms inside your garden will help to aerate the soil. Okay, so as they move around and they eat and they process a lot of the stuff that they eat, they make little tunnels, and that helps to aerate, and it also helps to irrigate so that the water goes down in there. And back on the waterfront, not the waterfront, but over here, I had this installed last year, and I want to get a couple more. These are rain barrels. So these rain barrels, basically everything that comes down from my eaves trough when it rains, and actually it's quite full because we got serious rain yesterday, and what it does is a little screen here, stops all the stuff from going in. This water goes in here, and then I can actually just turn this on, put it into my container, and water my garden. So it's actually a really, really good thing. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pause now, and I'm just going to show you just transplanting a couple of those tomatoes. All right, talk to you in a second.